welcome, but he needs no introduction.
Thanks for the apology for Donald Trump, but to be honest, I don't know how we can apologise for Boris Johnson. I come from a Catholic background, and there's a long period in purgatory for a number of us as a result of this. if not worse. I've just come from Parliament, and I apologise I was so late. We had votes this evening. Jeremy Corbyn sent a message of solidarity, by the way. He was on the picket lines at SOAS, and he'll be joining other picket lines over this coming period. I think it's important. This is a key dispute. It's a key period. I think it's exactly as been said this next few days about demonstrating strength in numbers, and I'll be at Goldsmiths tomorrow if I can get up in time. And the whole purpose of this is to express solidarity with this individual dispute. But it's important that we link these disputes as much as we possibly can. The CWU coming out soon. Bakers, well, you can't keep them in, can you, bakers? and we were on the picket lines last week at the Foreign Office with PCS, which is a bitter dispute, actually, about outsourcing. And Bays, today, we've just received information from the PCS branch in Bays that there's been, with all the privatisation that's gone on, there's been a breakdown in computer systems, and some of the lowest paid workers have not been paid. And some of those, if you remember, within the department, this is the Department of Employment, meant to look after workers and employment rights, had to set up amongst themselves a food bank to feed their own workers. That's how bad it got. And I think it's important that we just explain to people why these disputes are happening and their historical significance. All of you are lecturers, you know the history of this. But today we were having a debate in Parliament about tax avoidance and tax evasion. And it's interesting because the Chancellor didn't turn up. I'd written to him and asked him questions about his role in tax avoidance and tax evasion. I don't know whether you saw it. There was a bit in Private Eye last week. I think there's going to be more in the FT tomorrow. He was, his main business associate was prosecuted for tax avoidance, had to pay back £8 million. And the companies that the Chancellor Sunak was associated with were based largely in the Cayman Islands, which of course is one of the most significant tax havens on the globe. That's what we're dealing with. But we need to explain to people now where we've got to. And it does go back. In 2007, 2008, when we had the economic crisis, neoliberals saw that as, this was a crisis they couldn't miss the opportunity of. They just couldn't. This was their gift to then come into power in 2010 in this country and do what they'd been planning, well, since the Second World War, since we set up the welfare state under a Labour government, which was to reduce the size of the state. And by God, that's what they've done over 10 years. The whole exercise was cut after cut after cut. And we've seen every public service, as a result of 10 years of austerity, is in crisis. There isn't a public service out there at the moment that isn't in some form of crisis, whether it ranges right the way across from local authorities, some of them have already gone to administration virtually, to prisons, the overcrowding, the levels of violence and abuse that's been taking place there as well, into education itself. And then, of course, in terms of housing, where we have 125,000 children being brought up homeless, some of them now being brought up in ship containers. And then into care. We had a debate on social care this afternoon as well. 87 people die a day before they get receive the care that they need. We had the UN rapporteur come here and report on, I've never heard the term used in relation to poverty in our country for decades, but he reported on destitution. And then with regard to disabled people, actually the second rapporteur that came along described what was, in his terms, the systematic abuse of the human rights of disabled people in this country as a result of austerity. That's where we've got to. So the process was reduce the state by cuts, but also reduce the size of the state by undermining trade union rights so that they could cut wages and pensions. And that's what it was about, literally shifting the balance between capital and labour within the workplace. And they did that as a result of anti-trade union legislation, after trade union legislation. But it was very specific attacks, and it was, first of all, within the state sector, and then beyond that as well, that gave confidence to other employers to come and cut wages and pensions. But also, the way in which they tried to ensure that there wouldn't be a fight back was to introduce a level of insecurity in employment in this country that maybe we haven't seen since my dad was on a docker on the Liverpool docks, where you turned up at work and you stood on the paving stones, and then you got selected each day, possibly for work or not, by a gang of men. So they introduced 0-hour contracts, 1 million people nearly on them now. But also they couldn't allow the public sector to have secure employment. So that's why casualisation now is right there across the piece, particularly within education. You know it better than most. That's what this was all about. 10 years of austerity, cutting the state, shifting the balance of power at work. Why? Well, it wasn't about saving money, actually, because they've given £100 billion away in tax cuts to the rich and corporations. But also they've allowed, and the figure today in the debate, HMRC, actually who's interested in this on HMRC, they analysed the tax gap and they said it's 35 billion, but they didn't take into account the profit shifting by multinationals. So tax research said actually it's 90 billion a year in terms of tax evasion and tax avoidance that's taken place. And we've now become the laundromat city. The City of London is the laundromat city for laundering dirty money. It's just staggering what's gone on over the last 10 years. So it's not about we can't afford it. It's that what this is about is a deliberate shift of balance of power and wealth, exactly as Tony Benn said we need to do in reverse. It's gone from working people to the rich and the corporations. That's what this is about. So that's what the CWU dispute is about because of the privatisation. That's what McDonnell's is about because of the low pay and what's been happening with regard to 0-hour contracts. And that's what's happening with regard to PCS and virtually other trade union now. Now, we were hoping that the cavalry would come over the hill in the form of Jeremy Corbyn on a white horse. Well, I bloody well was anyway. And we worked hard to do that. But to be frank, we got caught in the vice of Brexit. But also, let's be honest about it, we got caught in 4 years the most grotesque levels of vilification and victimisation on any political leader that we've ever seen in this country. And I say in the States they'll come for you in the same way as well, because they're already starting the same things against Bernie Sanders as we saw here. Tragically, we didn't win that election. But to be honest, we never expected that it would just be about winning elections. It was never that. I kept saying to people, this isn't about, don't ever think we're going to transform society by just electing a group of Labour MPs and say, off you go to get it done. That will never, ever work. The only way we actually change society is by building a movement. And that movement has to be a fighting movement. Yes, winning elections whenever we can, but recognising also that we had other forms of power. And the other form of power is the right and the ability to work in solidarity to withdraw your labour. But it's also occupying those streets, and if necessary, occupying those buildings. So I think that's what we've got to recognise in this coming period. Johnson's got a majority of 80, it's all falling about at the moment in all sorts of disarray, but they'll still maintain that majority of 80, so they'll be able to get through Parliament virtually everything that they want to. And there'll be another assault. We've got more employment legislation coming that will seek to restrict the rights of trade unions, try to bring in minimum service levels just to undermine RMT in particular, and we'll battle that out in Parliament. But the reality is the battle is here. It's on the picket line and it's in the streets. And I keep saying to Labour MPs, and what's great at the moment is we've got this new wave of young Labour MPs that have come into Parliament. Some of you may have seen. But they recognise now the role of an MP, yes, is in Parliament, but more importantly, it's in their communities and it's on the picket lines as well. And that's where we'll be. So on behalf of Jeremy Corbyn and myself, we give this pledge. Every time there's an industrial action that's taking place, where it's a fight for justice for our workers, for justice for our members of individual unions, we'll be on that picket line. We'll be in that demonstration. And yes, if necessary, with students and others, we'll be in that occupation. Because that's the way, in solidarity, we've got to fight these Tories now. That's the way that we've won in the past and will win again. And this union, UCU has won in the past as well. You've pushed them back. That's why they keep coming back for you. Because what you're doing is you're showing to other unions, if you stand firm in solidarity, you can win. And that's what we're going to do in this dispute. Let's be absolutely clear. When we go out there and we're on the picket lines, we're saying to people, we're going to win this dispute because it's so important. Exactly as been said, we can't go on like this. And yes, it's about our members' individual lives, about low pay, casualisation, etc. But actually it's also something bigger than that too. It's about the future of education. All of you came into education, all of you came into jobs because you wanted to pass that gift on from one generation to another of the enjoyment of education, the ability to acquire those skills and that vision for a better life, the better quality of life that we all aspire to. As long as they continue to undermine the educational system by pressurising workers, casualising their work, undermining their wages, I think they will destroy the potential of a decent education in this country too. So there's a much bigger issue at stake than just individual wages or pensions. This is about the future of education for our children. And I think that's a way in which we'll gain community support as well, because people are waking up to it now about what's happening. Finally, let me just say this. In Parliament, we'll do all that we possibly can. Look, we'll do all we possibly can in voicing your cause and arguing your case. Of course we will, but it does mean that actually the reality is the strikes, the picket lines, the demonstrations are where we need to be. And I'll finish on this point. It's the point I was hearing when I came in. Look, years ago when I was a kid, I was a trade union. I was with the NUM, and then I went to the TUC. So I was trained in the art of organising meetings where no one turned up, and demonstrations that no one ever heard about, and things like that. That was the old days. I don't think that's ever going to happen again, because what we need now is a fighting TUC alongside the fighting unions, where unions are coming together to coordinate their action, and when they strike together, and they strike effectively, and we all stand in solidarity. The trade union and the political wing of our movement now working together. Solidarity.
Speakers for the solidarity you bring here, and you know our fight is your fight as well, and also thanks to all the strikers who've been out on the streets the last few days, and we'll be back out there tomorrow. And also just to say to everyone, thank you for coming, and let's keep building the fight back. Collection, solidarity, and where we can, action. Thank you.